Welcome to the Not So Planned podcast,
where we take you on a journey through the exciting,
unpredictable at CAG here in Guatemala.
Our podcast is all about exploring how God
moves in our daily school routines,
whether they are planned or completely unexpected.
Welcome, everybody, to our first episode of the Not So Planned podcast. I am your host, Caleb Hardiman.
And I am your other host, Ailey Leva.
So we're both students of the student media elective, and today we're starting our first episode of this Not So Planned podcast. And this is all new to us, cameras and mics and everything. So hopefully this goes well. Our first round.
Okay. So, today we're just gonna tell, we have a teacher right now, and we're just generally gonna ask him question. But first off, this is part of CAG, which is located in Guatemala in Misco.
And today we have a quick sponsorship from Delgado Printing. So they helped us print our yearbooks this year, and here is your yearbook reveal. Make it count. And this is a team effort from everyone here in student media. We have our wonderful 2024 background, and it just represents how we have to make every moment in life count. And whatever second or minute goes by, we have to share it with the people that we love most, and just use whatever second and time we have to glorify God through it. Okay, so our expectations for this podcast is that hopefully it goes well, nothing catastrophic happens, no mic or technical issues, and we'd like to welcome you, our guest today, Mr. Brandon Loftus.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, guys.
Welcome.
I'm ready.
Oh, I'm ready too.
Okay, so according to the bio, Mr. Loftus is a teacher administrator with 17 years of experience in education. He's known to contribute in high school education, physics, chemistry, and engineering. He has worked in middle schools, high schools, and district centers. And he has worked in technology centers. Mr. Loftus has been our director at CAG for 2 years. And today he has joined us for this podcast to tell us his insights and answer our questions.
Okay, so once again, thank you.
I'll do my best.
Thank you, Mr. Loftus, for being here. You are my guy's PE teacher like 2 years ago. And
so you're so big now.
No, I'm pretty skinny still. I need to gain a couple pounds. But that was a really fun experience for me, and just getting to start to know you. And as I've known you for these past couple of years, it's been a great experience. So our first question is, how did you come to know CAG?
I came to know CAG through your dad, actually. A friend of mine asked me to come down on a mission trip, and he was leading a trip with Engadi Ministries, came down, and God called our family to Guatemala over the course of 4 mornings. And we came down in 2019 to take a look at the different kinds of ministry opportunities that were down here. CAG was a part of that, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I remember it was one evening, and I walked outside, and my dad was calling someone. It was some bald dude on his cell phone. I'm like, Dad, who's that? And he's like, that's going to be your future PE teacher. I'm like, oh, really? That's cool. And I just kind of saw you from the side of his phone. I'm like, okay. And I walked off. And then now you're here.
The rest is history.
The rest is history. Okay. One more, another question. How did CAG compare to your expectations?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I'd never been a part of a Christian school before. I'd always been in public education. And so I think I had some preconceived notions of how big the school was going to be or how small the school was going to be, the kinds of students. And, one of the best ways I can describe the difference between CAG and my experience in the classroom in the US was students thanking me every time class was done. They would say, "Thank you for today, Mr. Loftus," or "Thank you for what you did today." And I think that is an example of how CAG is different and how it exceeded my expectations.
That's great. CAG is a great school.
It is.
Y'all should come to CAG. Personally, I'm just saying. Great campus, great people. Great teachers as well.
Okay, and like as we know, CAG is located in Guatemala. How has CAG affected your view of Guatemala?
Wow. So CAG has been my entire lens for my view of Guatemala down here. So the relationships that I have, the ministry that I have done has all come through relationships with parents that are here or other teachers that are here. So for example, within Gotti Ministries with your dad going on Zone 18 Sunday fun days with bouncy castles and soccer and face painting and all that good stuff. Servant days, the lens with which I've viewed Guatemala has largely been through CAG, and it's been a real big blessing as a ministry hub and just as a hub of a really loving and caring community. My introduction was just wonderfully easy, if it can be considered easy, to Guatemala through the school.
That is amazing, because like most people think of Guatemala as a jungle, but it actually is completely different. It's not just like a little hut in the middle of nowhere. There is actual people out there who need help. And yeah, thank you.
To much people's surprise, we do have movie theaters here.
Yeah.
And Kailua
they're cheap.
And they're cheap, yeah.
Yeah, the popcorn's cheap and delicious.
And Kailua is really nice. Some people don't expect that from a little country. But we're actually bigger than some European countries like Austria.
Okay.
Which is impressive. I learned that a couple
Today
days ago.
I learned.
So like this question, like where do you think CAG could improve in some ways?
So this kind of piggybacks on my answer for how I've experienced Guatemala through CAG. So because CAG is such a loving and caring and inclusive place, I think that's something that we can look to expand in the future. I think that CAG has more to offer with more people who are here than who we currently have. And so I think ways that we can expand how we serve is by trying to bring in different types of families who could be served well by the kind of education and discipleship and love that this community has to offer. So I'm really hopeful that in the future, CAG expands its enrollment and expands to serving families who love Jesus, who might not have otherwise had the opportunity to come here, whether for their kids in the past or their kids right now.
And if for whoever outside of Guatemala or outside of CAG may be watching this, how would you describe CAG, like the school or the people?
Yeah, so it's a cliche that many people don't like when someone describes an institution as a family, but it is true. CAG is a family. It feels like a family. The friends and the relationships that you build here feel like family. And I know that there are people here that I would trust with my children as much as I would trust with my brother. And I think that's a really special thing. And even though it's cliche for a reason. That's why I would tell people is the truth.
And if you could take something that you've learned here at CAG to the States, and if I don't know what you're going to do in the States, whether you teach again or if you are teaching, how would you implement something you learned here in Guatemala and in CAG to those schools in the States?
Yeah. So this is something that my wife and I have talked about a good bit. And we don't want to squander the experience here that many people in the U.S. don't get. And so we're able to come back to the U.S. with a perspective on living in Central America, on a culture different than ours, a culture different than South Carolina. And interestingly enough, like many states in the U.S., the Hispanic and Latin American population is growing, and where we're returning to, that's no exception. And so I think our experience here gives us relational equity as soon as we get there, to connect with communities that we otherwise wouldn't connect with, because they understand that we know to a small extent, or maybe even a larger extent, what their experience was like in Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador. And we're really looking forward to that.
How would you compare and contrast CAG to Guatemala necessarily?
CAG to Guatemala.
Oh, sorry, the U.S. to Guatemala.
U.S. to Guatemala. Oh gosh, how long is this podcast? Okay. I think it's a wonderful and a beautiful culture that we knew very little to nothing about before we came. You know, we are really taken aback by the kind of joy that people will find in situations that are really hard. Haile, you were talking about how, people they may think of Guatemala as just a jungle and mountain villages and people in huts, and that's true. But some of the most joyful people that I have met have the least and live in those kinds of villages. And so that's a difficult thing to find in my experience in the U.S. When people suffer in the U.S., usually they don't have much joy. And something that I think is particularly strong in the Guatemalan culture and is beautiful about the Guatemalan culture is finding joy despite circumstances.
Yeah, we see that a lot in like all the poverty. You always in these rural villages or even in the poor parts of the city, you always see little kids running around just happy to have missionaries come down and bring them candy, something you probably wouldn't see in a lot of other homes and things like that, other places. We have a special question for you, Mr. Loftus.
Special question.
Okay, this is a little bit of a Bible trivia.
Oh, gosh.
And if anyone's been paying attention to chapel, which I hope many of you have, what is the verse of the year?
Matthew 6:33.
And what does it say?
So as a teacher, I like asking questions. What do you think, Matt? No, it's seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will be added to you.
Thank you for paying attention in chapel, Mr. Loftus.
And 10 minutes before this podcast.
Okay. I have one last question despite the trivia question.
Shoot.
As you were saying earlier, Hispanics in the States have been increasing. And how has your experience here in Guatemala over the past 3 years, how do you think that'll help you connect with Hispanics in the States?
One thing I've found is language. So here, I've really been able to experience feeling like an outsider, a foreigner, because I am a foreigner. And a large part of that is language. And I know what it feels like to leave Guatemala and go to the US where you might not speak English and you might feel like you were on the fringes and you might feel like an outsider. And one of the ways that God has gifted us is with a little bit of Spanish. It's not great, we're not fluent, but I do know what it feels like to have someone down here from Guatemala speak to me in English. And it really demonstrates and gives us the opportunity as we return to the US and speak Spanish and understand things that someone may have experienced culturally in a way that's going to make them feel like they have a little slice of home when they are far from home. And that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to doing, making people who are foreigners and who feel far from home get a little slice of that home.
Yeah, that's great.
Was it hard for you and your family to learn Spanish?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. So one of the tricky things is we were supposed to come down and, like many missionaries, go to language school. And when we were supposed to come down was right in the middle of COVID. And so we really felt like God was still calling us to come down. The option to do language learning before we came down wasn't there, but we felt the call was really strong. So we came down with no Spanish. Being at an English-speaking school does not make it particularly easy to practice Spanish, but thankfully we live in a community where everybody speaks Spanish, our next-door neighbors, and so we've got a little bit of opportunity, but it would have been great to go through language learning, but poco a poco.
Okay. I think that's all of our questions that we have for Mr. Loftus. Thank you once again, Mr. Loftus, for coming here, taking time out of your very cramped and busy schedule.
My pleasure.
To sit here and just answer our questions. I hope this has helped for everyone who is watching this and they've understood a bit more of Mr. Loftus, that he's not just the tall, bald guy that walks around CAG, but he's a really good guy. I'd really, before he leaves, I advise you can just sit down and just talk to him. He has a lot to say. And I've appreciated my time I've had with him and over these past couple of years. And he's just been a great blessing to me and so many other people, especially to my dad. I know he has been. So thank you, Mr. Loftus.
Super kind words. Thank you. And it's been a privilege and my pleasure.
Okay. And I also want to say thank you, Mr. Loftus, because being a director in an English-speaking school, but in a country that you had no idea before, is extremely hard. So I want to thank you for your perseverance and for setting an example to show like your faith towards God. Just thank you. And you are such a good example.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you
If there's
so
any
much.
good example, it's been the Holy Spirit working through me. But thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and I am pretty sure that is all it for today. Thank you for watching. Make sure to share this to your friends, to your family, just to share the idea of CAG, and just thank you for watching.